Most men would hate the guy who ended up with their wife. I was his best man. And I know how that sounds. I know exactly what you're thinking right now. But by the time I finish telling you this story, I think you'll understand why I wouldn't change a single thing about how it all happened. My name is Daniel, and I'm a cardiologist. I've spent years studying how the heart works, the valves, the chambers, the rhythm, the pressure points. I know how to read an EKG at 2 in the morning without my glasses, how to stay calm when a patient's pulse disappears, how to make decisions in seconds that other people can't even process in hours. But none of that training, none of those years, ever prepared me for the quieter kind of heartbreak. The kind that doesn't arrive all at once. The kind that just slowly, steadily, makes itself at home until one day you look around and realize the life you built looks nothing like what you imagined. Sarah and I met during residency. We were both 26, both running on 4 hours of sleep and terrible hospital coffee, and both completely convinced that we were going to save the world one patient at a time. She was an internist, sharp and steady, the kind of doctor who never panicked and always asked the right questions. I fell for her somewhere between a brutal overnight shift and a vending machine dinner at 3 in the morning. She laughed at something I said, I don't even remember what, and that was it. I was gone. We dated for 2 years before we got married. It was a small wedding, nothing extravagant, just close friends and family in a venue near the hospital because neither of us had the energy to plan anything bigger. Marcus was there, of course. He'd been my best friend since our first year of university, and by the time Sarah and I got married, he was already like family. He gave a toast that night that made half the room cry, including me. He talked about what it meant to watch someone you love find the person they were supposed to be with. I remember thinking at the time that nobody had ever known me as well as Marcus did. The three of us fell into an easy rhythm after that. Dinners together on weekends, covering each other's shifts when someone needed a break, texting in a group chat that was mostly complaints about hospital administration and the occasional terrible medical joke. Sarah and Marcus got along naturally, the way some people just do. There was never any tension, never anything that made me uncomfortable. They were both serious people, both deeply committed to their work, and they understood each other in that particular way that doctors do, that shared language of exhaustion and responsibility that's hard to explain to someone outside of medicine. But somewhere around year 3, things between Sarah and me started to change. Not suddenly. Not with a fight or a revelation or a dramatic moment I could point to later. It was gradual, the way erosion works, so slow you don't notice it until the ground has already shifted beneath you. We started missing dinners because of shifts, and then we stopped rescheduling them. We stopped asking each other about our days, not out of cruelty, but because the answers were always the same and we both knew it. We were kind to each other. We were considerate. We just weren't connected anymore. By year 4, our apartment felt like a very comfortable hotel. We shared a space, we shared a last name, and we shared absolutely nothing else. No arguments, no tension, no drama, just a steady, polite distance that neither of us seemed to know how to cross. I used to lie awake sometimes and try to figure out when exactly it had happened, what the moment was when we went from partners to strangers. But I never could pinpoint it. That's the thing about slow endings. They don't give you a clear before and after. They just give you the after, and leave you to figure out the rest. We didn't have children. We had talked about it in the early years, the way young couples do, making vague plans about timing and space and when things would settle down. But things never settled down, and at some point the conversation quietly disappeared. I think, if I'm honest, we both understood somewhere deep down that the foundation wasn't solid enough to build more on top of it. We just never said it out loud. I filed for divorce at the end of year 5. I sat Sarah down on a Sunday morning, made coffee for both of us, and told her what I think she already knew. That I loved her as a person. That I respected her enormously. That I was not in love with her anymore, and hadn't been for a long time, and that staying felt like the most dishonest thing I could do to both of us. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded and said that she felt exactly the same way. We sat there for another hour, talking calmly, going through the practical things, and by the end we had shaken hands across the kitchen table like two colleagues closing a case. It was the most civilized ending I could have imagined, and I meant every word I said to her. Marcus called that evening. He didn't push, didn't ask too many questions, just checked in and told me he was there. I told him I was okay, and the truth was, I really was. There was no anger, no bitterness, nothing to untangle emotionally. Just a quiet, clean feeling of relief, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for a very long time. Life after the divorce was quieter than I expected, and honestly, quieter in a good way. I picked up more shifts, started running in the mornings again, and rediscovered what it felt like to just be myself without the weight of something that wasn't working anymore. I wasn't lonely. I was just alone, and for the first time in years, that felt completely fine. Marcus and I kept up our usual rhythm. Lunch between shifts, the occasional evening run, long conversations about work and life and nothing in particular. He was the same as always, steady, present, a little too serious sometimes but always genuine. I noticed, maybe 2 or 3 months after the divorce, that he seemed slightly different. Not in a dramatic way. Just quieter than usual. More careful with his words. Like someone who was carrying something and working very hard not to show it. I didn't say anything at first. I figured he was dealing with something at work, or maybe just going through one of those stretches where everything feels heavier than normal. We all have them. But then I started noticing other things. Small things. The way he'd ask about Sarah a little too casually, slipping her name into conversation just once and then moving on quickly, like he hadn't meant to say it at all. The way his phone screen would sometimes light up and he'd turn it face down without checking it when I was sitting across from him. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't hurt. I was just paying attention, the way you do when you know someone well enough to read the spaces between what they're saying. And what I was reading told me that Marcus was struggling with something he didn't know how to bring to me. It was a Tuesday evening when I finally saw it clearly. The three of us had agreed to meet for dinner. Sarah and I were still perfectly friendly, the kind of easy, uncomplicated friendship that sometimes comes after a calm divorce. I arrived a few minutes early and sat down at the table, and when they walked in together through the restaurant door, something in the way they moved stopped me completely. They weren't touching. They weren't even walking that close. But there was something in the way Marcus held the door and the way Sarah glanced up at him for just half a second that told me everything I needed to know. I sat with it for the rest of the evening, just watching, saying nothing. They were both careful, both composed, both completely committed to acting normal. And they were good at it. But I knew Marcus better than almost anyone in the world, and I knew Sarah well enough to recognize when she was working to keep something contained. By the time we said goodbye in the parking lot, I was completely certain. I didn't feel angry. I want you to understand that, because I think most people would expect me to. But what I felt was something closer to sadness for them, not for me, for them. Because these were two genuinely good people who were clearly dealing with something real and spending enormous energy being afraid of it. And I thought about how long they must have been carrying that, trying to protect me from something that, honestly, didn't need to be hidden from me at all. I called Marcus the next morning and asked him to meet me for coffee before our shifts. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept. I waited until we both had our cups and then I just said it, quietly and directly. I told him I had seen them. That I understood. That I was not angry, not even a little, and that whatever was happening between him and Sarah was not a betrayal of me because Sarah and I had been finished long before the paperwork ever made it official. I told him that if this was real, then the only thing I wanted was for them to stop hiding it. He didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then he put his coffee down and told me that he had been terrified of losing me as a friend. That he had fought it for months before anything ever happened between them. That nothing had started until well after the divorce was final, and that even then it had taken them a long time to admit it to each other, let alone to themselves. I believed every word, because I knew Marcus, and because the timeline made complete sense with everything I had already quietly observed. I told him it was okay. And I meant it completely. Things moved naturally after that. Sarah and Marcus stopped hiding, stopped being careful around me, and the strange tension that I hadn't fully named until it was gone simply disappeared. The three of us had dinner again a few weeks later, and this time it was genuinely easy. They were good together in a way that was obvious once you were allowed to see it, the same steadiness, the same seriousness, the same deep commitment to the people around them. I was happy for them. That is not a complicated statement. I was just happy for them. Marcus proposed to Sarah about a year later. He called me the morning before he did it and asked if I was truly okay with everything, one more time, because that's the kind of person he is. I told him to stop asking and go by the ring. He laughed, and it was the most relaxed I'd heard him sound in over a year. He asked me to be his witness at the wedding. I said yes without hesitating. The wedding was held on a warm Saturday afternoon at a small venue outside the city, surrounded by the kind of people who genuinely loved both of them. I stood at the front in a dark suit, a few steps from Marcus, watching Sarah walk down the aisle. She was radiant. He looked like a man who could not believe his luck. And I stood there feeling something I hadn't expected, a fullness, a completeness, like watching a story land exactly where it was supposed to. I signed the papers as their witness after the ceremony, and then I went to find my table for the reception. I was seated next to a woman named Claire, a colleague of Sarah's from the hospital. She had dark eyes and a very dry sense of humor, and she made me laugh 3 times before the first course arrived. We talked through most of the reception, moved to the terrace when the music got loud, and stayed there talking until the staff began quietly stacking chairs around us. She asked me at some point how I knew the couple. I told her the short version, that Marcus was my oldest friend and that I was very glad he'd found someone like Sarah. She smiled and said that was a generous way to put it. I told her it was just the honest way. We exchanged numbers in the parking lot. She texted me before she'd even reached her car, just a single line that said it was nice to meet someone who actually meant what he said. I stood there in the dark, in my good suit, outside my best friend's wedding, smiling at my phone like an idiot. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like something was just beginning.